In the heart of New York City, Times Square, on an ordinary day like any other, tourists from all over the world gather to soak in the hustle and bustle of the city that never sleeps. Amidst the noisy crowd, there was one special figure standing apart from everyone else, Sergeant James Carter, a U.S. Honor Guard. He stood tall in his formal dark blue uniform, polished leather shoes, and a black helmet with a white plume, his posture straight as a statue. James didn't move, his eyes fixed forward, silent like a monument. Tourists around began to notice him. They stood close, waved their hands, and deliberately made provocative gestures, hoping to see him react. Some even sneered, saying, "He's like a robot. Do you think they have emotions?" Laughter erupted among the crowd, but James remained unmoving, not turning his head, not letting a single expression escape his face. Yet, his calm demeanor only seemed to draw more curiosity, and the challenges grew stronger. A man in a fine suit nudged his friend and said, "I bet he won't even budge." Amid the chaos, James remained firm, unmoved, as though nothing mattered but the mission he had to perform. The challenges intensified, with some tourists even waving their hands in front of him or lightly shoving him as if to break his composure. But James didn't flinch, not even a twitch. He stood there, his expression unchanging, not reacting to the antics of the crowd. It was this unwavering calm, his composure in the face of increasing pressure, that made those around him start to sense something extraordinary about this soldier. He was not just a soldier, he was a symbol of patience and mental strength. While everyone around him was focused on testing his endurance, James stood like a warrior in the quietest moments of his life. As the crowd began to thin out, no one could have predicted that Sergeant James Carter's calm would not last for long. Suddenly, from a distance, a deep growl filled the air, cutting through the noise of Times Square. People turned around, their faces confused, and soon fear began to creep into their minds. "What's going on?" a woman screamed. And then, in a single moment, the crowd realized something unbelievable. A massive bull was charging toward them. The bull, weighing over 2,000 pounds, 900 kilograms, roared furiously. Its eyes glowed red, and its nostrils flared with every breath. The pounding of its hooves on the concrete echoed loudly, shaking the very ground beneath. The force of the beast was so powerful that even the surrounding buildings seemed to tremble. Panic swept through the crowd. People screamed, running in all directions, some tripping over one another, desperate to escape. A man in a suit stumbled, dropping his camera, while a mother clutched her child tightly, her face pale with fear. But amid this chaos, James Carter stood unwavering. He didn't move a muscle. No fear was visible on his face. His eyes remained fixed forward, locked on the charging bull, as if he had already made his decision to face the threat. The crowd continued to scatter, but James remained motionless, like an immovable force. As the bull thundered closer, it seemed as though it was headed straight for him, and everyone else thought the same. There was no way he would survive. The bull kept charging, its hooves smashing against the pavement, a deadly force heading straight for the soldier. Every step it took seemed to shake the ground. A collision was imminent, and the people around could only watch, frozen in terror. But James did not budge. Not a step back, not even a slight shift. The moment the bull collided with him, it was like an explosion of power, a crash that seemed impossible to withstand. But then, something astonishing happened. James didn't fall. Instead, the impact sent him back a few inches, but he quickly regained his footing, his posture still perfect, his rifle firmly gripped. He didn't fall to the ground. He didn't flinch. The bull, though stunned by the resistance, didn't understand. It stopped momentarily, confused, its massive body trembling as if trying to comprehend what had just happened. The crowd gasped in disbelief. No one could understand how James had withstood the charge. Everyone expected him to be knocked over, to be crushed by the enormous force of the bull. But he stood tall, as though nothing had happened. The fear that had once consumed the crowd slowly began to turn into awe. They had just witnessed something impossible, something beyond human comprehension. For a few seconds, everything seemed to freeze. James, unfazed by the beast, stood there, calm and composed, while the bull, now confused, began to back away. The crowd still couldn't believe what they were seeing. The soldier had not only survived, he had made the impossible seem possible. The bull had met a force that it could not break, and now it was retreating, not because it was weaker, but because it had faced something even stronger. The silence that followed the bull's unexpected retreat seemed surreal. The bull, once a roaring, unstoppable force, had now paused just a few feet away from Sergeant James Carter, its confusion palpable. The crowd, still recovering from the shock, could only stare in awe at the scene unfolding before them. James remained standing, his stance unyielding as ever, his eyes fixed firmly on the bull, his expression unchanged. It was as if time had stopped. No one could comprehend what had just happened. They had all expected the worst, a gruesome spectacle, yet the soldier stood there as though he were invincible, untouched by the fury of the beast. But just when the crowd thought the tension had reached its peak, something even more extraordinary occurred. The bull, still caught in its own confusion, suddenly snorted loudly, its nostrils flaring as if trying to rid itself of the strange sensation it had just encountered. The beast seemed to be struggling with the reality of what had happened. It had charged with all its might, expecting to break the human before it, to shatter the soldier's resistance. But James had withstood it. It was an unexplainable phenomenon. The bull took a few hesitant steps back, its eyes darting between the soldier and the crowd. It wasn't ready to give up, but it also wasn't sure what to do next. The tension in the air was suffocating. The crowd, who had been paralyzed by fear only moments ago, was now whispering among themselves, unsure of what to expect. Would the bull charge again? Would the soldier move? They had seen him stand tall against the beast's full force, but could he endure another attack? For a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. The bull lowered its head, the muscles in its neck tensing, as if preparing for another violent charge. Its hooves scraped against the concrete, sending a shiver through the onlookers. James didn't flinch. He remained poised, his rifle gripped tightly in his hands, eyes still locked on the bull. It was clear that he was ready, prepared for whatever came next. He had faced the impossible once, and he would face it again. The crowd's breath hitched. The bull moved forward once more, its massive body lurching toward the soldier. Its horned head dropped, ready to pierce through anything that stood in its way. The sound of its hooves pounding on the pavement rang in the ears of every onlooker, the tension building to a fever pitch. The air grew thick with anticipation, the moment holding its breath as the bull's charge neared. Would this be the end? Would James Carter finally be defeated? Just as it seemed the bull would reach him, something incredible happened. The bull stopped again, abruptly, its forward momentum grinding to a halt. It stood there, frozen in place, staring at the soldier as if it had just realized something. The massive creature, capable of tearing through anything in its path, had met its match. It had charged at full force, and yet, It was the soldier who remained unshaken. The crowd, now hushed, watched in awe as the bull took a final hesitant step back, its massive frame trembling. No one dared to speak, no one dared to move. The beast, defeated not by strength but by something far more profound, sat down in front of James, its wild eyes still watching the unbroken soldier. And in that moment, the unthinkable happened. James Carter stood tall, victorious, having faced the impossible and emerged unchanged. The crowd was silent, absorbing the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. A battle between man and nature had just been won, not with brute force, but with unshakable willpower. The soldier had not just survived, he had triumphed. The bull, still sitting before Sergeant James Carter, seemed to be struggling with something it couldn't comprehend. Its massive body shuddered, and its eyes, once filled with rage, were now full of confusion. It was as if the creature had encountered an adversary unlike any other, one it couldn't overpower or outmatch. The crowd, still in shock, stood frozen, unsure of what was happening. They had all expected a tragic end, the soldier to be trampled underfoot or thrown aside like an insignificant object. But here he was, standing unyielding, while the bull, once an unstoppable force, now sat helplessly in front of him. The tension in the air was unbearable. James Carter stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the bull, his grip on his rifle tight but controlled. There was no fear in his gaze, no hesitation. He had faced death head-on before, but this was something entirely different. The bull was not retreating because it was weak, it was retreating because it had met a force it couldn't understand. And that force stood before it, calm, poised, and resolute. It was as if nature itself had halted, baffled by the sheer unbreakable spirit of one man. The crowd, sensing that something extraordinary had just unfolded, began to stir. Whispers filled the air as people slowly turned their attention back to the scene. They had witnessed the impossible. The man had faced the beast head-on and had not only survived, but had left the bull unsure of what to do next. What had just happened? Was this some kind of miracle, or had they all witnessed a profound moment of human willpower that transcended logic? The answers were unclear, but the truth was undeniable. James Carter had stood his ground, and the bull had faltered. And then, something that no one expected happened. The bull, still sitting in front of James, suddenly shifted its massive head. It snorted loudly, flaring its nostrils, as if trying to shake off its confusion. It raised its head slowly, its eyes now fixed directly on the soldier, as if measuring him for the first time. A low rumble built up from deep within the creature, its muscles rippling, its body tense. The bull was preparing for another charge. The crowd gasped collectively, instinctively retreating further as the tension in the square escalated once more. Everyone feared that this would be the moment when the bull would finish what it had started. James Carter remained unmoving, unflinching, his stance as firm as ever. His gaze did not waver, even as the bull's body coiled with raw power, ready to charge once again. It was a standoff, man against beast, will against force. The bull stepped forward, its massive body shaking with each movement, but as it took another step, something strange happened. It stopped again, right in front of James, its colossal head barely inches from the soldier. The bull snorted once more, then lowered its gaze, as if realizing that there was nothing left to prove. It was as if it had reached some kind of silent understanding with the man before it. It had charged, it had tested him, and now it sat down quietly in front of him, defeated, not by physical force, but by something far deeper. The crowd, now holding their breath, could not believe what they had just witnessed. James Carter had faced down an enraged, charging bull, and not only had he survived, but he had also somehow made the bull submit. The impossible had been achieved, and in that surreal moment, the soldier stood victorious. His unwavering spirit had triumphed over the raw power of nature, leaving the crowd stunned into silence. James had become a living legend, a symbol of unshakable willpower and determination. As the dust began to settle and the roar of the bull's fury faded into the background, a strange calm descended over Times Square. The once chaotic scene, filled with fear and confusion, had transformed into a stillness that seemed almost unnatural. The bull, now sitting peacefully in front of Sergeant James Carter, was no longer the wild, unpredictable force of nature that had crashed through the square only moments ago. It was as if the creature had reached a moment of realization, a recognition of the strength and resolve of the man standing before it. The crowd, still in shock, was now completely silent. The whispers had stopped, and every eye was fixed on the extraordinary scene unfolding before them. No one dared speak, no one dared move. It was as though the very fabric of reality had been altered by what they had just witnessed. James Carter, standing tall and composed, was the center of it all. His expression was calm, unwavering, and his posture remained perfect, as though the storm of chaos that had just passed had never even touched him. And yet, there was still one lingering question in the air. Why had the bull stopped? The beast, after all, was not known for mercy or hesitation. It had charged with unbridled fury, expecting to crush everything in its path. But now, after its second charge had failed, the bull sat motionless, staring at James as if acknowledging the defeat it could not comprehend. The crowd could not understand it. Some whispered in disbelief, their minds struggling to grasp what had just happened. How could a man stand so firm, so resolute, in the face of such raw power? How had he made the impossible happen? As the silence stretched on, a new sound began to echo through the streets, the sound of sirens. First, it was distant, faint, but it quickly grew louder. Police cars and animal control vehicles, lights flashing, sped toward the square. The crowd shifted nervously, their attention now divided between the bull and the approaching authorities. Would the bull lash out again? Would the scene escalate into even more chaos? But James Carter remained unmoved. His eyes never left the bull. His body never tensed. He stood there as if he were the calm at the eye of the storm, unshaken by the growing tension around him. The officers, unsure of what they were walking into, approached cautiously. They had come to deal with a dangerous animal, but they were unprepared for the sight before them, a bull, sitting peacefully, gazing at a man who had withstood its full force without a single sign of fear or weakness. The police stopped several feet away, unsure of how to proceed. They had expected a confrontation, an uncontrollable animal that would need to be subdued. Instead, they found a scene of unbelievable calm, and the man who had made it possible. The bull had lost its will to fight, not because of physical force, but because of the unyielding spirit of the soldier before it. It was a standoff that defied logic and reason, and no one could explain why it had ended in this way. For hours after the event, news crews arrived to cover the story. The footage quickly went viral, flooding the internet with millions of views. Headlines screamed across the world, "Man faces down bull and wins." Journalists speculated about the mental fortitude required to face such a challenge, while psychologists debated the psychological strength it took for James to remain so calm. Experts tried to explain why the bull had stopped, but no one could come up with a definitive answer. What everyone agreed on was that this moment would go down in history, not just for the bravery displayed, but for the extraordinary power of human will in the face of nature's raw fury.